Workshop on leadership and calling. My name is James Faris. I'm one of the pastors at Second Reformed Presbyterian Church in Indianapolis, and Barry and I have put some thought into what we're doing here today together. Obviously, we have a panel that we're going to be hearing from. Before I move to introducing them, I want to just talk a little bit about the subject matter. I'm happy to be doing this today, partly as tribute to Dave Long. Many of you knew him, probably not all of you, but he was substantially involved in training and leading a number of us. I would certainly include that number, Barry, as well, some of the rest of you in this room. And one of the things that Dave was so effective in was simply taking men where they were and starting with whoever was there and leading them along. And this is one of the things that we, I believe, really need to continue working on as a denomination, because sometimes it's easy for us to try to look for the people that we think are sort of the all-stars, or the people who may be well on their way toward leadership, and we fail to develop others who are around us. And we have a shortage of pastors. One of the things we need to be praying for is that the Lord will raise up more pastors. But it's a long process, and there's a sense in which it's a little bit like a big funnel. We need to see lots of people beginning to develop as leaders, and through that the Lord will raise up those who are more gifted in particular ways, lead people into pastoral ministry or into other positions of leadership. And so we want to consider today how it is that we can really all begin to develop the leadership gifts that the Lord has placed in the body. So I want to look at Romans chapter 12, first of all. As you maybe want to turn to Romans chapter 12, I just want you to think about the book of Proverbs as well. Proverbs is unique, as I understand it, in ancient Near Eastern wisdom literature, in that typically the kind of wisdom that Solomon is giving to his son would be given only to the king's son, and only given secretly to the king's son. And the reason for this is so that his son would have an advantage over the rest of the population and be able to maintain his leadership. I had a friend who went to Wabash College, and there was a fellow student of his there who was an absolute genius, and he would go to all of these study sessions where people would ask questions, and he noticed that this friend never would ask questions at the Q&A times with the professors. And so he asked him, why do you go to these things if you never ask any questions? And he said, well, I already know I'm smarter enough than the rest of the students that I might mess up the curve if I ask questions that cause them to think about things that might be on the test that they wouldn't think about otherwise. So he's just there to glean anything that he's overlooked, right? And this is kind of the mindset of how Solomon would be giving wisdom to his son. He wants him to keep that kind of an advantage. But God gives the book of Proverbs a book of wisdom for leadership to the whole of the nation. Why? Well, God wants a kingdom of priests to be raised up. People engaged in leadership of all kinds. And so we turn to the book of Romans then, and we see the same kind of theme in Romans. So Romans chapter 12, verse 4. We heard from this passage earlier this week. For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function, so we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members one of another. Having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them. If prophecy, in proportion to our faith. If service, in our serving. The one who teaches, in his teaching. The one who exhorts, in his exhortation. The one who contributes, in generosity. The one who leads, with zeal. The one who does acts of mercy, with cheerfulness. So here we have these gifts, and there are differing gifts that we each have. And some people are particularly gifted in these ways. Leadership would be one of those. But think about some of these other gifts that are here. If your gift is serving, if your gift is service, you should do it in your serving. Does everyone have this gift? The answer is no. There's something unique. But is everyone to be serving? Absolutely, everyone is to be serving. Does everyone have the gift of generosity? Not in this sense, but is everyone to be giving? Yes, the scripture is clear. Everyone is to be giving. Does everyone have the particular gift of leadership? No, not everyone has that as a spiritual gift, or perhaps not for all of their life. but everyone is called to lead in some capacity. And so we want to cultivate in our congregations a growing sense of leadership in which we're drawing all kinds of people into positions where they step up and draw others forward into various acts of service. And again, we need to consider where we are and ask not who is God raising up as sort of obvious leaders, but we need to be looking at what God has already given us. One example of this is in missions. There are 2 mission stations that I know of, and I won't give names, but in one particular place, the missionaries who have gone have looked for people who would really be gifted as pastors, the kinds of people that can pass exams and so forth, and they have labored for year after year after year on the field, and the missionaries continue to be the ones who do the preaching and teaching, and when they're asked why things haven't grown beyond what they are, the answer is, well, we don't have any qualified men who have been raised up. In the other case, the missionaries went and they looked at who was already there, and they just began to invest at the lowest level with what the Lord had provided in terms of converts. And they faithfully labored in that year after year, so that it wasn't very many more years before they had pastors going out all over the place. Perhaps not with the level of training that we would expect here in the U.S., but the church is multiplying and it's growing. And as I see it, the difference is the way in which they approach leadership. In the second case, they started where they were, and they just invested in the people who were there. Heard a sermon one time from a brother who preached on Shamgar. Gets one verse in the book of Judges, and you remember that he slew 600 Philistines with an ox goad. And this fellow's outline of the sermon was that Shamgar, he was serving the Lord. He started where he was, and he used what he had, and he did what he could. And that's where we are with leadership development. We start where we are, we use what we have, and in faith we do what we can, and we trust that the Lord is going to bless that. So I have a panel here of people that I've invited, and some of them were very shy about serving on the panel, but I've asked these to serve because in some ways you would look at them and you wouldn't necessarily think of them as those who have been real powerhouses in leadership development, and yet they have been. My mother was well known for public speaking in high school, and she had a speech coach who was Dr. Hawker, and he raised up a lot of champions. Some of his students went on to negotiate Geneva Peace Accords and these kinds of things. And when I was in high school working on a speech contest, he was retired, long retired, and so she took me to see him, and we were there in his living room, and I knew that this guy is legendary, right? And as he began to try to help me, I realized this guy couldn't defeat Elmer Fudd in a debate. He just couldn't speak. But he knew what good speakers looked like and how they sounded. And that's often the role that many of you will play. Maybe you don't count yourself as a terribly effective leader, but the Lord is going to use you to draw others into leadership. And so these have just been those who have faithfully drawn others into positions of leadership in places that I've seen. So I've asked each of them to share a little bit about their ministry and the things that they have been engaged in, particularly at a local level. You all know, of course, Barry York, and Barry serves at the seminary, but as we talked about things, I wanted him to share more about some of the things that he did in developing high school students at Sycamore into leaders. Barry, of course, invested deeply into my life, and he's promised not to share any stories about me. John Hanson would be second, and John was a man in our presbytery who was always investing in me and others like me when I was, again, in high school, and in often quiet ways, but so many of us appreciate the things that John has done. And John also leads a trip to the Echo Farm Educational Concerns for Hunger organization, takes a group of students down each year from our presbytery to serve on that farm for a couple of weeks, and he's drawn not only students into positions of leadership, but also older people as well. Diane Schaefer and her husband John have coordinated the Covenant Boy Family Conference for the last 3 years, and this is the one place that, or one of the places, the primary place that I've seen her sweep all kinds of people into positions of leadership. And then finally, Cynthia J Sebastian is a member at Second Reformed Presbyterian Church, and she's one of the ones who coordinates our English as a Second Language program, and she very quietly but effectively simply calls people to serve. She looks for people who have a heart. So I've asked each of them if they would first of all just introduce the kind of ministry that they've been involved in along these lines, and then I ask them to go back through the line and share a few of the principles of leadership that they have learned. So that's where we'll begin. So Barry, could you just lead us out? Yeah.
Well, one of the things that confronted us in Kokomo when I was a pastor there was we had a lot of children in our own home. We have 6 children. We were pretty committed to home education. And I was out in the community, particularly down at a college campus, trying to reach out. I taught there math, and I was having some ministry there. And in the busyness of my pastoral ministry, I realized my wife was somewhat drowning under the weight of trying to raise, do math with a 12 or 13-year-old boy at the kitchen table with a baby pulling at her leg. And I'm a math teacher, so we just started thinking about how I could be more involved in the home education front, and I felt like I needed to be. And at the same time, we knew other families in the church were going through this, so we ended up starting slowly, having some classes at the church, and it ended up developing into what we call Sycamore Covenant Academy, which ended up meeting at the church 2 days a week. We had classes that we were offering for high school students primarily, but it ended up going down into the junior high level. And it was just a wonderful time of taking the gifts of the different parents in the congregation, having them come in and teach a class that they were an expert in that field, but also it put young people in our building 2 days a week. And as a pastor, I found that to be a very exciting way of being able to just build into the life of the students. And we had not only classes going on, but we ended up having devotions each day we were there. And I would use that time to have the young people do catechism and learn how to present, and learn how to sing the Psalms together. We ended up doing service projects for fundraising. At one point, the parents who were overseeing this, we paid our teachers, so we had a budget. It was a modest but substantial budget to raise. And we were just bewildered about what to do. And we ended up creating let's have the kids do it. So we created the student leadership team. And it was just great to see their creativity, guided by some of the adults, but see their creativity result in being able to do these projects. One of them was just they would clean the building every week. They used it, they cleaned the building, and then people in the congregation would donate money to the church for them to clean it. And it just ended up being this really nice symbiotic relationship between the academy and the church. And we ended up having projects going on into the community. We would do volunteer work down at the rescue mission. We began having what we called YSSP, all these initials, Youth Summer Service Project. And for 3 days during the summer, the youth would come to the church, and we would do projects there and again out in the community. It was great to give these young people leadership responsibilities over a team to do some of these things. It ended up giving us a positive impact into the community because toward the end, about half of the students weren't even RP. They were just people in the community attending the school but wanting to participate with what we were doing. So that's a little bit of my experience.
Well, I think a lot of my experience has been with youth. As I was introduced, I have been involved with the ECHO mission trips for 22 years. worked as an elder in the church and then as a member in the church. What I found is leadership, developing leadership is an intentional and planned process. And it's something that you're looking out for and making efforts to do. One of the recent opportunities was in our Sabbath school, and there was a young man that his parents had joined the church. He was in college. After he got out of college, he started coming to our church also. I discerned that he had great character and a love for the Lord, but he was very quiet. Well, the Christian Education Committee was looking for teachers for the coming year. I hadn't signed up, but when the list came out, my name was there as one of the teachers. I have a friend that's on the CE committee. He knows if they're short, you just put my name in one of those spots. But I said, well, I'd be glad to do it, but could I have this young man as my assistant? And sure, they let me ask him. I asked him, and he was willing to come. I told him that I'd be doing the teaching, and I'd like to have him help me. And I felt developed ways to have, well, at first I would teach the lesson. He might only read a small portion and maybe have 2 questions to ask. Pretty soon it was, he was doing part of the lesson, I was doing part of the lesson. And then he would do it one week, I would do it another week. After about 2 or 3 times back and forth like that, he wanted to do it all the time and has developed into a great teacher. But it was a plan on my part. I didn't see him involved in the church. I thought he had potential, he had the character. I like to see character in people before I start developing in that way. But it was certainly a success story. James didn't use too many names, but I'll use James' name in this. When James was in high school, there were a couple of guys in our presbytery that every time we had leadership needs, it went to James or one of these other 2 guys. And Rich Johnson and I were leading the presbytery youth at that time, and we were aware there were some other people in the presbytery, guys in the presbytery that needed leadership experience. And we were planning the first ECHO team, and it was decided that James and these other couple of guys would not be allowed to go on it. There was nothing wrong with James, but we knew if he went on it, we wouldn't have the opportunity to pour into some other guys that needed leadership experience. And I think it was explained to James that he was not invited, and why he wasn't invited. And I know it was explained to at least one other person that we did not want.
That would be John's son. I don't ever remember getting that explanation, but
James did get an opportunity to lead an ECHO trip a few years later with his wife, but yes, the other one was my son, and we did not, we would not have been able to develop the leadership in these other guys with these 2 guys alone. And so that was part of the, that was a plan, and it, I think, was a successful plan as well. I'm always looking for help, and there's been a great friendship developed between me and a man my age in working together on ECHO. And you know, once you get help and leadership like that, it allows you to step back. And as I've gotten older, I don't have the energy to do some of the things in leadership that I used to be able to do. And I need other leaders along. There are a lot of lessons you learn, and some of this will come out, hopefully, in the panel discussion. But for me, developing leadership is planned, it's intentional, and it is a process.
My name is Diane Schaefer. I'm one of those McCrackens who has my maiden name. And I'm telling you this because my dad was Ray McCracken, and when I think about Cub McCoy, I actually think about the way I was raised, and I don't think that I would have been ready to help Jonathan the way that we did to direct Cub McCoy if I wasn't raised the way I was, so I want to talk just a little bit about that. When I was little, we lived in California. I was probably five to age, or maybe 4 to age 9. And we had a new work there in Walnut, California. And I just remember my parents would have us every Sunday morning early, or maybe even Saturday night, get all the psalm books ready and put them around the seats. And just our whole way of thinking was preparing for others. They said, we're here to show these people when they come in the door that we are ready for them. So that principle has stuck in my head forever, and I try to still do that. But they were training me, and I didn't even know it then. I just thought it was kind of cool to get to be a part of having people in our house and setting things up. So it started back then, and then when I was in Mineola, Kansas, I remember when I was 14, someone came along, and again, it was a small church, and we were very involved in ministry, having people in our home and always being ready, and thinking of, basically the question was, what is the need? If there's a need, the people that are here need to meet those needs as best as we can. So that's the kind of the big question that guided our ministry. And when I was 14, somebody taught me how to lead the singing. I mean, I like to sing. At that point, I didn't probably read music very well, but somebody just came alongside. I think it was Deidre Copeland and Carol Heineman. Those women in Mineola, Kansas helped teach us. So it was such a small group, everybody learned. So that's something I have shared, and I always tell HP, I think he's in here, I say, use me as the very last desperate, there's nobody else to lead person, but just because it's not something I love to do, it's something I learned to do, and I feel like I need to do it because there's a need there. So as far as Cub McCoy goes, Jonathan did a lot more of the directing than I did. When we started, Shane said, when we agreed to it, one of the first principles we thought of was, we asked them, why did you pick us? And they said, well, we think that you are able to lead people, especially Jonathan, because that's part of his work. He's up in front of people all the time. And so the principle there is that Shane knew Jonathan. So one thing that was important is getting to know people. If you ask questions, you find out what their work is, and then you say, I think, because he's doing seminars all the time, he might be a person that can get up in front of people. And so when we were at Cub McCoy, I just would come alongside him and find out what different types of people they were looking for. And we didn't really know a lot of the people because we're in Florida. So another principle is that we asked for help. So we wrote all the pastors and said, we really don't know anybody, so we have a need for a recreation director. Who do you think is good? So just because you don't maybe have all the answers, ask for help. Even in your congregation, ask a friend who knows somebody that you may not know well and say, do you think that person, would know how to do this, or anybody would be able to, you know, run a recreation program or whatever the need is. So asking for help was a biggie there at Kevin McCoy. The other thing is willingness, just people who are there and seem to enjoy it. When they asked us to do Kevin McCoy, they said another big reason we asked you is because we know you love camp. So if you know people that love to be there, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, they just are there all the time, that's a good place to start because their hearts are in it. And the learning how is important, and you need to develop abilities, but the heart is even much more important, I think. If they're willing to do something, they'll figure it out. And how many of you have seen the show Undercover Boss? You ever seen that show? A CEO of a company goes into Taco Bell and works alongside of his workers, and they don't realize who he is, but they go about their business, and he does all the jobs and gets a sense and feel for his company and the types of challenges they have and who's, you know, if they're doing well or not. And so John and I had never directed Kevin McCoy before, but they asked us to do it, and we thought, well, we'll take our turn. We've been taking for several years, and now it's time for us to take our turn. We just feel like we should participate in this work, or no one can enjoy it because somebody's doing the work. So in Undercover Boss, they usually it's so very positive. They come out and say, you know, your heart's great, you're trying hard, but you know, there's these areas we need to work on, and so I'm going to help you do that. So we, you know, if you don't think you're great at something or know exactly how to do it, I think in the Christian circle, most people will be very patient with you, and if you make a mistake, it's okay, it's no big deal. You'll figure it out and get better, and the more you say yes to little things, the more you practice, and practice it doesn't make perfect this side of heaven, but it does help a lot, where if you haven't ever gotten up in front of the church to do an announcement about a picnic, you know, don't be the one that just, and I feel like I'm giving advice, but I'm not. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just thinking of things that I've done before where I thought, I don't really want to be the one to get up there and talk. I'm just not good at that. Don't resign yourself to saying, I can't do that. You can do that. It may be really scary, and you might shake, and you might stumble over your words, but it's okay. The more you say yes, the more you can get comfortable doing things. So Jonathan, I've seen a growth in him with just up to Kevin McCoy. He, in his jobs all along, and even at church as an elder, he's just done the work and slowly gotten more and more responsibility, and his public speaking has gotten, you know, really great, and it's just because he's been willing to say yes over and over and do it even though it may not be comfortable. So anyway, those are a few of the things that I was thinking about.
I'm Cynthia, and the ASL program was started by Andrew, and unfortunately he had to go back and finish his last year of college, and so
This would be Andrew Badiato, some of you may have
I'm sorry,
heard
yes.
seminars yesterday.
Yes. So, you know, there was a need for someone to continue the program. The students loved it.
You hold the mic up, maybe.
The students really loved it, and so Sherry Bell and I volunteered somewhat hesitantly to take on the leadership of ESL. So one of the things that Andrew Badiato had said is we are trying to meet the perceived need of these people, which is to learn English, and really underneath that we're trying to meet their real need, which is the gospel. And in the first semester that we had it, we realized a lot of these people, especially those that were students and had come in from another country, were actually quite lonely. And, you know, not only was it English, they wanted friendship, they wanted someone to talk to. Some of them really hadn't been in an American home. So there was really a lot more ministry than just, you know, English. And so in order to continue the program, you know, we need helpers. A lot of them were college students that were going back to college, so we really needed more volunteers. So one thing I could say is, you know, we put in the bulletin notice, you know, ESL ministry starts on this day. Please, if you'd like to volunteer, see Sherry and Cynthia. And there are folks that respond to that, but it's not very many people. I find that a lot of the quieter, younger people, maybe those who feel they're not equipped, don't tend to come up to you and say, hey, I want to volunteer. So these are the people you kind of go up to after church and you say, hey, have you considered ESL? You know, I think you'd be really good. You know, you see that they have a love for people, and I was looking more for those skills, a love for people, a willingness to befriend others, much more. I mean, it really wasn't looking at whether they knew nouns and pronouns and prepositions. That was kind of secondary. Sometimes simply asking, would you be interested? I've had a number of people right away. I don't know whether the Lord they were looking for something, and here was someone saying, would you like to be involved in ESL? People would say to me right away, yes, I would like to do that. For some of the others, there would be still a little bit of debate. No, I really can't do that. I've never talked with international students. And then you maybe talk a little bit with them, reassure them, you know, tell them the Lord will equip them, you know, that they can try it and see that, you know, if it isn't, you know, if it's too difficult, let me know. Maybe we can find something else for you to do. And then if they're really, I mean, if they're willing but still a little bit nervous about it, you know, kind of ease them into it. You know, perhaps you can be an assistant with someone else. Perhaps you can help with childcare. Perhaps you can just do registration. So just start off. And I have seen people who said, oh no, I couldn't interact, do registration, and then say, oh, I'm ready to meet with someone now. So just, you know, gently introduce them to something that they feel that they can do, and then watch to see how the Lord uses that. And keep telling them the Lord will equip you. All you really need to do is be willing to talk with someone. So, the only other thing I would add is for those that are a little diffident, and a lot of the young, and I'm going to say, I've been working with a lot of college students that have come back, young single ladies. A lot of them seem a little diffident, so just follow up. Just make sure everything's okay. Are you all right? You know, is there anything that you're finding difficult? And try and, you know, just make sure that they're okay. You don't want them to be just struggling by themselves.
So that brings us to kind of next phase. I wanted to ask all of our panelists to think about the kinds of things that they look for in people that they would like to see developed into leaders. So we've touched on some of those things already, but we need to be thinking intentionally. That's really the whole point that we'd like to make here, is we need to be thinking intentionally about drawing people into positions of leadership. It really draws out the heart. There are things we want to emphasize, like character over competence, right? You can have the most competent person in the world, but if it's not a person who has the right character and the right heart, things will end badly. Gary preached on this earlier. Men being called into ministry, what's simply the heart for ministry. So maybe some of you came here and you think, well, I thought this was going to be more about discerning my call to pastoral ministry. We would simply answer, yes, it is, but it's maybe at a little different level than what you perceive. We're calling people to be engaged in leadership and raising up leaders in ways that really touch the heart, that may not necessarily always be up front. But Dave Long, for instance, just to give one example of this, he'd always talk about how we're looking for faithful, available, and teachable people. You've probably heard that before, right? FAT people, F-A-T, faithful, available, teachable. You can have people that have two of the three, but if they don't have all three, it's probably not the sort of person you want to see drawn in substantially to leadership. So that would be one little principle. I might just ask you as panelists, what are some of the basic principles or qualities that you're looking for in the people that you're seeking to draw into leadership? And again, you've already touched on some of those, but what would be some of the things you're looking for?
Well, the fact is a good starting point. You don't develop character by putting a person into top leadership and then hoping the character follows along. Vince Ward taught me a very important lesson just this year. My job in South Sudan was to train men wanting to go into the pastorate. And I had one man that would come for training, and it was just painful to meet with him. He was very faithful at coming, but his English was so poor. And we would go through and listen to him read or try to develop an answer in English from the Bible was just painful. And I was wondering, what do I do with this man? And I asked Vince about it. Vince said, do you know Carlo? Yes, I knew Carlo. He was one of the leaders in the Presbytery there. He was the one that had a daily radio broadcast, not only on that radio station, but another one. He was a leading, probably the best preacher in the whole country. I said, yes, I know Carlo. He worked in the next room from me. And he said, well, when Carlo came, he was just like that. It was painful, but he was faithful. He kept coming back and coming back. We want to work with faithful men. And let's start off, and we want to find faithful people. It is intentional. I'm looking for people that are faithful, that have a good relationship with authority, that that are teachable. And finding these people, they're out there, they're in our churches, and they're not doing anything. One, they've never had the opportunity. Two, they don't feel like they've been prepared. Certainly, they don't have the confidence. But by carefully working with them, we can develop leadership from these people.
I think that one thing that I have learned is, and you know, as we were looking at the ESL class, you look for, I was looking for people that had a love for the lost, that were willing to share the gospel, and that were just loving, hospitable. That is the requirement of every Christian. So that, you know, you can cast the net kind of broad. But I think sometimes, you know, and I appreciate what you said about that, but sometimes you can put other requirements on them subconsciously, like, oh, the person's too quiet, no, it'll help if they were outgoing, and I just realized that no, you know, the Lord can use everybody, and so I found, you know, don't pre-select based on any other criteria other than those of faithfulness, you know, willingness, wanting to serve. Don't add extra requirements. And I'll illustrate this with one. Fluency in English was something that I thought was important. And we did, and that was, most people in the church met that requirement. There was a lady from another country who probably couldn't teach a class, but she wanted to help with ESL. And she was just wonderful. She spoke to everyone. She was very loving. She had people over. She made snacks. She was from the Philippines, so she made snacks that the students enjoyed. So just look for opportunities where you can have people. She worked alongside someone else. So I was just reminded, be careful that you only look for biblical principles and don't add in, you know, they're not going to to come out with leader on their forehead. They might actually come like not a leader, and then, we see that develop.
I was just going to add that modeling is a great way to show the kind of leader that you're looking for, and not that they're always looking, but actions do speak a lot more than words to some people. So, like, I would look for somebody that has good follow through, and again, I agree with what you said. But if someone's at a place that they're ready to lead, or be trained to lead, an important quality is follow through. That their word means something. That when they say something, they'll do it. And that's something that can be developed too. But we kind of know those people that are sort of that way and those who aren't. And it's hard to lead if you say we're going to start at 10 and then you don't start till 10:15, or I think it sends mixed messages, and it's good. Maybe that's just part of the training for leadership, but as a model, somebody who's looking for leaders, it's really good to do those things yourself first, and people will see that, and they may not even realize it, but later they go, oh yeah, we always started on time when so-and-so, or we always made sure we took time to do all the things that we said we were going to do. Another biggie is prayer, which is kind of obvious. I'm sure everybody agrees with that one. But I know with Kevin McCoy, for the people we asked to be leaders in the different areas, since we didn't know them especially, we should have probably done this first anyway, but we prayed, God, please show us people, help us to come in contact with people that we know are a fit that you think is best. And so prayer was key, and he did in every case raise up people through the other pastors, or just a phone call, somebody saying, hey, I know so-and-so, and they seem to be interested in this, maybe they could try it. And but I love the idea of having people do things that aren't doing them already. Seeing the person on the sidelines that seems quiet, then you get to know them a little bit, and it's like, wow, you have so much to offer. Just tell them that, and so I think everybody, like you said, has something to offer. It's just a matter of getting to know them well enough to find out what that is.
I've said plenty this week, so I was wanting to defer as much as possible. My two daughters rode their bikes all the way out from Pennsylvania to here, as 8 others did, and John Hanson led that trip. And I'm hoping I'm not embarrassing memory, but when she got here, she said, that was such a great time. And she said, I want to be just like Mr. Hanson when I grow up. He had an impact, and he led them all the way here safely, sort of thing. A couple of principles, I guess, I would bring before you today. I took a class on leadership, and I read a book by a man named Robert Clinton, and he studied 5,000 leaders and their development. And one of the things that is being emphasized here that I think is really, really important, he talks about having a sovereign mindset in that book, where it means that often when we think of God's sovereignty, we in the Reformed faith can limit it to salvation. And just think of it along those lines. But we have to remember He's sovereign over all of life. We think of this doctrine of providence. And that people are coming to us in all different situations of life. And we need to see how it is at that time in life God is shaping them. And not give up on them just because we may be getting a snapshot of their life at that point and we don't see something in them that we'd like to see. We shouldn't be giving up on them just at that moment, but to realize that God is constantly shaping and transforming His people. And I've had people tell me that leaders are born, not made. And that's a lie. I mean, that's just not true. I mean, look at the Bible. Look at the people in Scriptures. Jesus took fishermen, tax collectors, and common folk, and He invested in their lives, and they became apostles and the foundation of the early church. So the Lord develops leaders. He took shepherds out on hillsides and got them leading nations. So we have to be careful looking at the outward appearance, like in the case of David. Samuel thought certainly one of his older brothers was the guy he was after, and here God had this little younger brother that's going to end up being the leader. So God is constantly shaping people. Ephesians 2:10. We are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which he has prepared before the foundation of the world for those of us who love him. And so there are good works that God wants people to be doing, but we may be at a point in life with them where they're not ready for it yet, and part of our job is to take them along. And I think one of the principles that, you probably heard Dave Long's name a lot this week, and it's simply because of the big impression he's had on us. And one of the principles he practiced that we teach is the with him principle. Jesus chose his apostles, it says in Luke, after spending a night in prayer, so that they could be with him. And when we are thinking about doing ministry with people, we can't just think about meeting someone for a Bible study, and that's how I'm going to train them. That's part of the training. But so much of it's going to be opening up our life, our home, the hospitality that Cynthia's talking about, having people around us so that they can learn from us, so we can spend time with them. That's why I loved SCA when I was there, was that like the academy, is because I was with the students. Yes, I taught them in the class, but so often they were popping into my office and asking me questions. Pastor York, this is going on, and it was a moment of training. Conflict would arise, and they would come tell me, so-and-so's doing such and such. And I love this as a pastor. This is my get-to line. I said, have you talked to so-and-so about them having done such and such? No. I said, well, I haven't heard about it yet. Why don't you go back and talk to them, and if that doesn't correct the problem, then you come see me. And if they needed a little coaching about what to say, then I gave you the opportunity to give a little bit of training on the spot, and then you send them back. But you have to be with them. And that was the thing about Dave, is that he, for some reason, he loved me, and he befriended me, and he spent time with me. And when I was a graduate student at Purdue in mathematics, there was a little church house on the edge of the campus there, and I would go there during the day and do my work there, but I was always popping to his office, talking to him about things, and just having this time and this interaction with him. So if you're going to be a leader, you got to have people around you. People can't be bothering you. You've got to open up your life to have those folks around you. Maybe just one other thing I would add. I think so much of it too is you have to be willing to let people make mistakes and stumble. Actually, I think many leaders have significant crisis in their lives that are part of God's development of them, where he's really crushing out of them all of their pride and self-dependency. And often in those moments when you're going through a time like that with someone, you think, oh man, this person's never going to be a leader. Look at this. They just crashed and burned. And yet God is the God of the resurrection. And we need to make sure that as we're walking alongside people, we give them opportunities. Maybe they fail us. Maybe they don't do it like it should be done. That's where our love has to come. We have to be long-suffering with them, come back and coach them and work with them, and believe that God can raise them up and help them to use this as a learning process in their life. If you're a coach and you're going to yank the guy out of the game every time he makes a mistake, you're not going to have a very good team. You got to learn to work with the mistakes that people will make.
I might just add to that, thinking about things that we do with them, the with him principle. Again, one of the things that Dave was so effective in was not only giving us freedom, but he always emphasized, if you're going to give someone responsibility, they also have to have authority. You've got to go hands off at a certain point and let them succeed or fail. no opportunity to succeed if we don't have the opportunity to fail. And we see Jesus giving his disciples those kinds of experiences. But then another thing that we need to do, and Cynthia alluded to this, is we need to come back around and evaluate. So one of the things Dave always did with all of us, and that I do with the interns that we have, and to a man, everyone says, this is like some of the most significant time is evaluation. So one man will lead a Bible study one week, I'll lead it the next, we'll get together for breakfast the next week, and we'll evaluate, how did the group dynamic go? How did you lead? What were the questions like that you were asking? And that's just one example of how we can take time to evaluate with people. What are the things that you did? What worked? What didn't work? Help them sort of step outside of themselves and look at the situation that they were leading, and it helps to shape them and to cause them to be developed even further. So these are some of the principles, the things we're looking for, and you also started to really touch on the ways in which you engage with people to develop these leaders, whether young or old. We've got about 10 minutes left. I think maybe we'll open up for questions, unless, is there anything else that you really wanted to add, any of you four that are up here?
Well, I just add a few things that ways I go about this. First of all, I try to ensure early success for the person I'm working with. That means I need to be equipping them, but I'm also ready to rescue. Not quick to jump into rescue, but ready to rescue. With a young man that I was taking on as my assistant in teaching the Sabbath school class, when he prepared his first lesson, I prepared the same lesson. And I was prepared, if he crashed, to be able to finish out. But I also had questions if he was just kind of wavering in his class, just not making progress. I had questions that I could ask him. Now, do you think, you just made this point, do you think, and I'd ask a question about what he had just said. A lot of times, like in teaching, I know the first time you teach, you can have the whole lesson and you have it out word for word. You time it, you've got enough material to go the whole class. But you're a little bit nervous that first time you teach alone, and you get through all that material far faster than you planned. So I'm trying to be ready to rescue a person that I'm moving forward. Another important lesson that I've learned is the praise-criticism balance. I try to use a 7-to-1 rule, 7 pieces of praise, 7 points of praise for every time I need to criticize what they're doing. I try to get the praise in before I ever start identifying things that I am criticizing. You also have to resist taking charge. Sure, I can feel like I can do it better. But if I'm developing a leader, I have to resist my temptation to take charge. And my standards of excellence. Maybe I can do it better, but I have to let them have an opportunity to learn. Finally, my way, right way. My way doesn't mean it's the right way. It may be a way, it may even be a good way, but it's probably not the only right way, and it's may not even be the best way. And I have to be willing to let the personalities of other people and God's gifts in other people be demonstrated and used as they take on leadership.
I was just going to add one more thing about asking people to lead in different situations. I think it's important to remember that we should give them an opportunity to have an ending time. As far as, would you like to be a Sunday school teacher? Well, if they say yes and do it well the first year, I'm sure your churches have ways of asking each year or whatever, but just so that people don't feel like if they've done it once and done it well, they're gonna do it for the next 10 years, or not have an opportunity to say that they would like to stop or change or something. Because I think it's a real subtle thing that does happen, and then you feel kind of guilty when you're exhausted or something happens in your family of circumstances that are tough, and you're feeling like you need to be doing the good thing and teaching or whatever the task is or ministry that you have. So keeping, like, for instance, an example that through experience, when we were asked to do Cub McCoy, I know there were people that had led in different areas for years and years, and they did it with all their heart and wanted to. But we felt like at this season in our life that rather than just keeping it open-ended, that before we agreed, we said we would agree to do it for 3 years and then have that 4th year for international to get the next leaders. So I think it's okay when you're agreeing to lead to go ahead and put that ending point out there at the beginning if that's what you're feeling. If you're not and you want to do it on and on, that's great too. But giving people the opportunity to stop when they're ready, so they don't feel bad, I think is a good principle too.
It's not a life sentence. Okay, we've got a few minutes for questions. I realize this has been broad, but it's because there's no formula to leadership. All of our congregations are different, the people, the needs, and so forth. So we've tried to cover broad principles, but I would like to just take a moment now to let you ask some questions, and then we'll take as many as we can in the 4 minutes we have. Yes, back.
So you kind of detailed just some general principles or characteristics you like to see in someone to develop them as a leader. But James, you also kind of mentioned at the start about, taking people where they are in development as a leader. And so I guess to the panel, would you say that you want to see those kind of fundamental characteristics of a leader developed before you develop that person as a leader? Or would you see working to develop those characteristics while developing them as a leader?
I think it would be more of the latter, that you want to see it develop. And the easiest way to do it is, Jesus said, he who is faithful in a little thing will be faithful in much. So as some of the folks here have alluded to, you don't want to just throw someone into a big leadership position who's unprepared. God does develop people over time. And so I think you want to give them small responsibilities, ask them for help, see how they're doing, evaluate how they're doing, talk with them how they're doing. And I think that gives you a lot of information on where they are in their character development and their abilities to do a particular task. And so it gives you a lot of information just by simply asking them to do small things. And then as they show faithfulness, giving them more responsibility.
The sort of leadership with a small L. So, I mean, some of the things I'm talking about, you might overbake your cookies, but if you're bringing snacks, you're in charge of snacks. I mean, you can give someone that responsibility, and they may forget, but it's not a major. You can move over that. It's not a major issue. So I think. Thinking of leadership in little small areas. So one thing I think about is, I've always had young people decorate the church for the international dinner, and I just let them go at it, right? I'm always excited when I come in and see what they've done, but, if they do something simple, it's fine. If, I think it goes back to no right way on some of those. So use those opportunities to look for people that you might want to move further. But initially, there are a lot of leadership opportunities that if someone fails, it's not something to do with the gospel or not a sin. It's just something got missed.
I would say, going back to the original point again with Dave, I look at Dave, who is a pretty ordinary guy in a lot of ways. That's one of the things that I have loved about him, is that he was not phenomenally gifted. He was faithful, and he tried to develop the same things in everyone that he saw around him. And then out of that, these further leadership gifts develop. Just fascinating thing to me, I was helping with the kindergartners yesterday. Really fascinating just to watch the whole group of the kindergartners and all of the different gifts and skills and personalities that you can see. And there are leadership gifts to be drawn out of each of those kids. And I just think to myself, what is it going to be like to come back to conference in 20 years if we have all of those in the same room together? And some of them will be, right? It's almost predictable what will happen with some of them. There are others that will be unpredictable, and they'll be raised up to be incredibly effective leaders if people take an interest in them, even though right now they may be fairly quiet. You know, we have Barry York here, who's our conference speaker. It's said that when he first preached in chapel, the biggest problem with the sermon is no one could hear it. and there was a shyness that was there, and everyone who was in the congregation locally knew that that was there in Barry. Well, how is it that we have Barry waving both arms around, filling the stage up there and belting out the truth of the gospel? Well, it's because others came alongside and helped to develop and to cause him to grow. Praise God for that. But we've got to start with people where they are. Got another question back here.
Yeah, I think these have been very helpful pointers. When I think of leadership and calling and ministry, I think more about leaders in the industry who can influence change and policy change. Is that an appropriate way to think about leadership? And is the RPCNA equipped to build up and encourage and develop those types of leaders for more global change?
We better be.
We don't have a lot of time to get into that, but I would say we should be. And one of my elders at College Hill, Keith Wing here, God uses him in that way, developing leaders. So he's been very influential in our congregation and at the seminary and other places in the church doing that, but he's being used of the word in the manner that you're talking about.
Well, we are out of time, and so we're going to close here with the word of prayer. But I just want you to think about your own local situation. How is it that God is using you or wanting to use you to call other people into positions of leadership and service, and that we would be active and intentional in this so that we would see a kingdom of priests raised up, many sons of Solomon, sons of our Father in heaven, who are gifted leaders and who are serving to use those gifts to the best of their ability. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you now for the fact that you are our King. Thank you, Lord Jesus, that you fulfill that office in addition to being prophet and priest. And we pray that we would reflect you by your grace in our local congregations. And we pray that you would make us places of gospel influence in our communities, in our workplaces, places of education and beyond. Thank you for these who have served here on the panel today. And we pray that you would build up our local congregations so that indeed Zion might be built up strong and fair. We pray this in Jesus' name.